Lauren Gregory, LGZ, welcome to the Free Trail Podcast. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
You are in New England right now, winding down an incredible 2024 trail racing season. We're going to talk all about it here during the course of this episode, but we start all of these shows in the same place, and I have to pose my traditional opening question to you, Lauren Gregory. What makes you, you? What are your unique strengths and weaknesses? How do they show up in your life?
Oh man, this feels like a really deep question to start with. I think something that has helped me, at least in running, and I'm sure it's helped me in other ways, but it's what I'm used to is running. So I'll just use in that context. But I feel like I just keep showing up till things happen. Like, I don't know if it's just persistence or stubbornness, but I feel like through college, I would just get hit with a bunch of injuries, like one after the other. And like, somehow I'm still doing this, even though there's many times where I didn't feel like that was in the cards, and I just kept coming back to it. And obviously it's not just a solo journey, but I feel like it's just one of those things where even if I can be really down in the dumps, so like pretty down deep with injury, just keep coming back. And here we are back on top for a little bit.
Can't keep LGZ down. One of the most important lessons that running teaches us is the powerful what can be achieved when you keep showing up. But before we go back in time and cover some of your background, since we're coming to the end of the season now, I figured we could just start our conversation with just where you're at after such a successful year. How are you reflecting on 2024, and what are you doing at this time of the year practically to keep the momentum going for 25?
Yeah, I feel like 24 was successful, but also had a lot of trial and error, and like, I don't know, was more, in my opinion, successful by chance, not as planned. I mean, it was planned, like I was training for specific things, but I was still feeling like I was flying by the seat of my pants and like figuring things out as I went, and had changed training like completely in the last year or so. So I don't know. I feel like now that I have a little bit, like 1 year's experience, still not a ton, but then now I can actually set like realistic goals for next year. Not that my goals this year weren't realistic, but like actually have a better idea of how to accomplish what exactly I want to accomplish. Because I feel like my months were just kind of like down, up, and then I ended on a high, which was good and properly planned, but maybe keeping like more consistency through the racing season.
All right. Well, now I really want to hear about that big shift in training, but maybe let's come back and chat about that a little bit later. Okay, so I know very little about you. Obviously, I'm a recent follower and admirer of yours after your big breakout year here in 2024. I know I'd heard your name before that, but for all intents and purposes, you'll be a new name to a lot of the free trail audience, and certainly your season this year put you on the map of a lot of trail running observers. So we'd love to just cover a little bit about background. So maybe just starting with the basics of where you grew up, what your childhood was like, and what role sport played in your childhood. We'll get started from there.
Yeah, I guess I started running competitively quite young, like maybe third or fourth grade. We just had a good running community where I lived in Fort Collins, Colorado. And yeah, my parents were, I don't know, frequent boulder runners. So that was like a big, like family tradition. And my parents would run it every year. And I think maybe they just got tired of getting a sitter or something. So they just dragged me along one year. And we do these like training runs, which I absolutely hated, but I don't know. They just wanted to make sure I was like going to handle it. And there was a race always the weekend before Boulder put on by Title IX for Mother's Day. It was called the Title IX K around the Boulder Res. And we would do that as like, can they do this? And so we'd run the Title IX K. And then if we could handle that, then we could run the Boulder. So
if you didn't DNF kind of the 9K, you could step up to 10K. Right?
Exactly. And usually my brother and I would win some like obscure like a Mom's Day specific prize, like a stroller or something that my mom had no use for. I think they just thought it was going to a mom, but my brother and I would just like clean house at these races. But Yeah, so that was kind of how we got going. And there was a Fort Collins track club in the summers, and they also had like an indoor track at CSU that we would meet at in the winters. And I don't know, distance running just kind of fit for me. And I was like quite good at it early on. My childhood was just like oddly endurance training based because my mom's pretty active, my dad's pretty active. So I feel like we were just pretty fit as kids, and that was helpful. But um, yeah, so just been competitive running. Like Tabor and I used to race when we were really young in Colorado. Like there's some funny pictures from way back when. And also
Yeah,
her like younger brother, Tyler. So
I was going to ask you about that. I read that you guys met when you were 10 or 11 years old, and now you both are obviously carving out these incredible careers for yourself in trail running. Tell me about that initial, collision with Tabor, how you guys came to be connected, and, how to what extent that relationship carries on in present day.
yeah, I remember like the Scholl family would come, like drive all over the state to these different 5Ks because they're from Kremling, which is pretty far out.
Yeah.
At least in my mind, it was like really far to me. And they
Oh,
would show up at
it's
like,
deep. Yeah.
yeah, and they would show up to like the Fort Collins Rec 5Ks because I think that was maybe the closest, like more competitive place to race. And both of them were like really good, and their parents were also quite good. And I would also happen to be at these 5Ks because my parents would go and do them too. So we were like, it was always like a family event at these like rec 5Ks. And they would throw down, and I'd just try to like run with them or do what I can. And yeah, so it was fun to like just see both of our like careers kind of like tandem, but we never really overlapped. We overlapped a little in college. I remember seeing her at an NCAA indoor meet in Birmingham, Alabama after I think a 3K or something. And she was fairly upset, but I hadn't seen her like in person since we were like really young. But yeah, it's just funny that we both kind of had like the same idea of where our career could go. Like, oh, from running super young to then still training, going to college, having injuries, ups and downs, because I know she went through it a few times. And then, transitioning to trail and like just still out here competing and enjoying it. I feel like everyone always used to tell my parents, and I'm sure their parents got it too, of like, oh, they're going to burn out. And we just never did. I'm still not burnt out. So we're still running, which is really great, I think, to break that stigma.
I hadn't thought about that or connected the dots about how Tabor's family have been instrumental in cultivating a love of activity and especially endurance activity since a very young age. It seems like your family is similar. And I think I read also that your brother has been competitive in mountain running too. So maybe say a few words about your parents, your brother, and how your parents especially created the conditions for you both to excel athletically. Because, as a dad myself now, who's also a big sports guy, it's one of the things that I think about is the joy of potentially in the future participating in these things together.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge piece is just to like get them to enjoy it as well. And what's weird about endurance is it's like so type 2 that the immediate love is not super, like it doesn't just click. At least it didn't for me. It didn't click immediately. It was just more of a slow burn over time. And it was almost like,
it's like, what
by
the
chance.
hell? I don't want to run the Boulder again, you guys.
Exactly. Well, the Boulder was sweet because they had snacks at the end. Like the expo's fantastic. And like, there's like music playing on every corner. It was mostly those training runs beforehand where I'm like, what is this Saturday activity, you guys? Like, I don't know about this. And this is before GPS. So they had guessed what mileage we were doing. And it was like in hindsight, way over 6 miles, like for sure. Like we were way out there. Anyways, but so yeah, both my parents were kind of into mountain biking when we were getting brought up. And so that was more of their outlet. And my mom had done triathlons and marathons, and she was still like a bit of runner. My dad was as well. So it's just kind of like what we were around. But I think we were mostly around biking. And that was, I think for me, like brought me to running because we would go on these bike rides or trips, like sweet vacations in hindsight, like to Moab or Tahoe or like these huge biking destinations that they'd read about in their guidebooks. And my brother and I would be pretty small. Like we were both pretty small children. And so we'd be on these bikes that I think were like what felt like our weight, like a 1-to-1 thing. And so we'd be biking and like trying to bike up hills with these super old clunky like kids bikes. And I'd be biking up the hill like, wait, I swear I can run this faster. Like this is way harder on a bike. And so I would just push the bike and run and probably be throwing a fit. And then the downs were super fun. So that made me like come back around to it. But yeah, I think it was just that they didn't really set like too many limits on us. They were like, oh, we're doing this, hop on board, like come along. And like given their saints for putting up with like probably some serious fits that my brother and I threw out there, but they brought snacks, which I appreciate. And then eventually like, oh wait, you know how to like, you get a little bigger and stronger and like you actually have pretty good handling skills on a bike. And like, oh, you're oddly aerobically fit for a 10-year-old. Like you can like crush on the soccer field and like, slam in PE. And so it's pretty fun. Like when you actually have like a pretty well-rounded fitness base. We also played a lot of tennis. Just my parents were like super active. Our weekends were like drive to Fort Collins when we lived in Windsor, which is further east, and then just be at a park all day and bring the bikes and bring the tennis rackets and the frisbees and the soccer ball. And like, we would just have like park day or maybe park weekend. So yeah. And then my brother and I overlapped in high school for 1 year. And so we were kind of training partners when he was a freshman, I was a senior, and that was super fun. So I've always kind of had him to run with as well. And like, he also started enjoying going out on adventure runs. So in high school, a lot of my teammates, we got really into like planning trail adventures because we just sit in the library and watch like Killian's YouTube and like really stoked on like these little trail runs that were like way smaller than what he was doing, but we'd plan these routes. Yeah. We got so stoked on Solomon TV. It was crazy.
I always had the thesis that it was going to be YouTube that created the explosion in trail running, and this is evidence here. And I love the anecdotes with your parents too. And now they probably shake their head and laugh 15 years later, and their daughter's this big professional runner who's dominating internationally. I wanted to ask you too about, the decision to go race at the University of Arkansas, go Razorbacks, going from Fort Collins, Colorado to Fayetteville.
Crazy.
Feels like kind of an abrupt, at least, difference in geography and probably culture to some degree. And, that feels to me is almost like a bold decision to make at a really young age. Can you tell me about the decision to go race for the University of Arkansas?
Oh, I agree with that being a very bold decision. Yeah. It's like 17-year-old me was making some real life changing decisions back then. So I guess I had a rough junior year and had broken my navicular in high school. So I didn't really have many like junior year results. So not a ton of calls were coming in, but Coach Harder was calling me like frequently. And that summer I kept leaving to go backpacking and stuff, and I'd just be out of service. And he was still like persistent on recruiting me and like showing up to my house, even though I was like probably the worst person to try to keep in contact with. But I went on my official and like mostly just really loved the team. I didn't have a huge list of criteria, which was my bad. I probably should have had more on my plate or like more on my list of things to look for. But I really just wanted someplace where I'd enjoy the culture, and like I'd had some people tell me about how different programs have like how the culture can kind of set the tone for the team and the things moving forward. But yeah, it was a pretty like gut decision. I was like, I want to get out of here. I mean, I would have gone to CU probably, but they had no money at the time because their team was so stacked. So it was like, oh, bratty me. It was like, I got to get out of Colorado. Like, this ain't worth it. Like Colorado, I just want to leave. Which I don't know if everyone gets that feeling, but it's like, feels like you need to get out. So I don't know. It was like a good push out the door. I was also looking at Cal at the time too. But the woman I was racing in Colorado had signed to Cal, and I was like, oh, well, she did it. I think I'll go do something different. So I just went and basically like went on one visit and canceled my other visits and signed with Arkansas. So I'm so glad it worked out, but it was a really bold decision.
Cool. I've never been to Fayetteville, but I've heard it's a cool place. And obviously, we'll come around and talk about your trip to Bentonville here a couple of weeks ago. So maybe backing up a step, I think this was maybe just before you went to college or during your time at the University of Arkansas. You went and won a bronze medal at the junior mountain running championship. So this is maybe reconnecting with the YouTube observation I had just a second ago. I'd love to hear just like how a person of your age at the time, being a teenager, came to qualify, number one, for the junior team, and why it was interesting to you at the time. Because I think, again, most people in that position are probably only focused on track and cross country and racing in the traditional sense. What motivated you to travel to Italy to take on this international competition?
Yeah, well, I was introduced to mountain, I guess, at the Nike Elite Camp, I think a couple of summers previous to that. And they had brought David Laney and Amanda Basham, who were both sponsored by Nike at the time. And we ran around Mount Hood. And I thought, oh my gosh, a pro trail runner is like actually a job. I had no idea. And so I got to see, and I came back from that camp and I was like, that's what I want to do, whatever they're doing. I just want to be a pro trail runner. So I kind of got the like itch for it pretty young. I think I was maybe like a sophomore, junior in high school. And then somehow I had figured out that you could just apply to be on the junior team. And this was after we had already gotten like stoked on mountain adventures, and like my teammates and I would just go on like what we thought were like fun rogue adventures that were just trail runs. So yeah, and I ended up qualifying for that. And I think that was the first year that they did the Salida like trail high school championships. And then my brother, and it was the same weekend, and my brother won that too. So we were like both kind of stoked on it at the same time. But it was kind of just happenstance. Maybe I saw it on Mile Split, or Paul Kirsch reached out. Actually, I had a teammate on that trip, Soleil Gaylord, and they were from Telluride, and her mom told me about it. So yeah, kind of just like through the grapevine of Colorado, you can kind of hear what's going on in like youth trail running.
How were you thinking about your future at that point, though? Heading into college, like was trail running was obviously like in your head as a potential career path after college, it sounds like.
I thought so. I mean, I wasn't sure exactly how that would all piece together because I was 17. I had no idea how the world worked. But I kept telling, and I like year after year, I would tell my college coach that that's what I want to do. And he would just like laugh. I don't think he knew what to say. Great guy, but I don't think he knew what the heck I was talking about. And then as things went on and like my fifth and sixth year happened, I think he started seeing that that was an actual option and brands were actually interested in that. But when I was talking about it, no one, I think, was really signing to do that. I think he was just trying not to laugh at me, which is nice of him.
What was it about trail running that made you want that to be your career path as opposed to doing track and field?
It felt like exactly what I liked about running. And at Fort Collins High, that's how we would train in the summer. It's like long runs would all be on trail. And every Friday we would run up Horsetooth Rock, like every single Friday. And I just thought that was kind of normal. But that was the summer. The summer running is what I loved most about the year. Like that's all I would look forward to is just summer and winter running, because we could just go on like adventures in the snow or adventures in the mountains. So I kind of just like felt like that was right for me.
This is so interesting because, again, I've always had this instinct that the YouTubeification of trail running was going to reinforce its explosion. And it seems to be that you're part of basically the first generation who has the opportunity to choose whether they want to race professionally on the trails versus the road and track. And that people are now making the conscious decision that, hey, I'd prefer to do trail running. This seems more interesting to me. And obviously now there's more opportunity behind it. So there's sort of like a delayed onset to the YouTubeification and to the growth of the professional ranks of people like you. But that's a very, very interesting thing. And like Tabor, when you were at the University of Arkansas, I'd love to ask you about the national championship, because I'm sure this is a highlight peak experience in your life. She also had a team national championship when she was at the University of Colorado. I think it was 2019 that the Razorbacks took the title. Tell me about that experience.
I mean, that for me personally was a little bittersweet. That season and year had been pretty rough. Like, I think I did the classic under fuel, have success, crash. And so I was in the midst of a crash. And so I had started that season with stress reaction in my metatarsal, but knew that the team was really good. And also it was just a team of all my best friends. So it was like, oh my gosh, I have to be making this team. I got to go help them out. And they were kind of counting on me. So I just swam and biked my butt off and got back on the line by conference and had a decent race at conference. And then I started feeling pain in my femur, which I had had before. So I knew kind of what it was leading up to nationals. So that race I was running on a stress reaction in my femur, unfortunately, but that kind of sucked because it was like such a high moment and like we managed to pull it off, but I just wasn't happy with my race in particular because it was like, I know I can do better, but I'm just not 100%. And so like in all, it was amazing to like all come together and also just to be with your best friends, like winning a national title and everyone getting it all together for that moment was so sweet. But then, they all got to keep training and go run at BU. And I was like back in the pool, pissed off. So yeah, I think that was my own personal experience with that, where it was really, really high, but that was also the end. Like that was the last straw for me. That was when I was like, I need to just stop getting hurt. Like this is the time I end whatever the heck bad habits I've been like perpetuating up to this point. So that was good because I needed something to just like really kick me in the butt out of that.
Say more about that. Are you referring to being underfueled?
Yeah, definitely dabbled in that sphere. I don't think knowingly at first, and then it just turned to like, oh, this is working. Why don't I just like keep taking it a step further and like exercising more and eating less and doing 100 things all at once. And so, yeah, that definitely caught up to me in the form of stress reactions and stress fractures. Yeah. And that took a while to like, after that season, I basically like told coach I wanted to medically retire. And he was like, hey, let's just hold off. Like he gave me plenty of time and space. And thank God he did, because I wouldn't have wanted to actually medically retire. I just thought I was totally done.
Wow.
Yeah.
So after the national championship, you being injured, you contemplated calling it a day, hanging up the spikes, so to speak, because of the issues you were experiencing. It made me actually think that there's kind of a running theme on the show of people who've raced collegiately about how it's not necessarily always a positive experience. They look back on it with mixed emotions. How would you summarize your career? Obviously, being a national champion is a massive high, but do you look back on it with mixed emotions?
Yeah, but I think in all positive. I think anything in that sort of pressure cooker environment is going to, like, it's not going to be all rainbows and butterflies ever. And like, I don't know. I think there's just too much going on at once because you're trying to finish school and you're also have pressure with your scholarship and pressure on the team trying to win a national title and also trying to do it in indoors and outdoors and the next year and the next year and the next year. And I mean, also you're trying to be the best that you can be and you're starting to figure out stuff about training and nutrition and like maybe where you can cut corners and you have no like experience to back up what you're doing. It's like all anecdotal. But I think for me, it was luckily in all positive because we didn't have terribly toxic like leadership or anything. And I think a lot of it was coming from me and not obviously like induced by outside pressures, but I will take like a lot of responsibility for the actions that I was taking to like improve in the sport. Anyways, yeah. So for me, it was like in all positive, but it taught me so many lessons in like the painful learn it by
Of
doing it
course. Yep.
way. Yeah.
Keep showing up like we started the conversation with.
Exactly. Yeah. And eventually, I mean, some people learn a little faster than I do, I guess, but you
Yeah.
figure it out.
I've always been a slow learner too. So coming out of college, yeah. Coming out of college, how were you evaluating your options? Like you still being a young person, were there specific people or resources that you leaned on to help you think about your career in the longer term?
Yeah, actually, Coach Harder was a lot of help to me. He just has so many connections. And the previous year, so my fifth year, I was like on the brink of going pro after that season. And I decided not to because there weren't any trail options. I was just going to join a group and like put off trail running for later. And that just did not like sit well with me. So I decided to come back. And just take my sixth year, and it came together the year after. So I just needed like one more year for brands to get on board with what I was asking for. And I did have an agent, and I do still have the same agent, but he helped me a lot with like getting the contract and like fighting for exactly what I wanted, which wasn't to join a group and like just run trail for an easy day. It's like, no, this is an actual serious discipline that I want to pursue.
Wow, I'd love for you to share a little bit more if you don't mind, because I mean, to me, that feels like a really mature way to orient your career at a really young age, to engage an agent and be very specific about what you want that individual to advocate for you on your behalf. If there's any way you can give us a peek behind the curtain, I don't know who you work with as an agent, feel free to tell us, but how you communicated to that person what your goals were and how they could be successful in advocating for you.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, luckily I'd gone through the experience the year before and not having an agent, but like talking to a bunch of agents. And I saw how nonchalantly I took my college decision and decided to go like 180 from that to pick my next step. I'm like, all right, that was a little unhinged. Time to actually focus on this. And so, yeah, I talked to just about every group, just about every coach, a lot of people on those teams to get their perspective, many different agents. And at that time, I would mention trail and to be fair, no one, I mean, the world's still like, don't collide. I think luckily for me, as from like a professional standpoint, it's very common in track to have an agent and the roads and stuff. And so coming out of college, it was like, yeah, you get an agent, then you move on. So I think for track, it didn't seem all that like crazy, but I do think a lot of the trail world they don't utilize agents for what they can. But I think from a professionalism standpoint, an agent is really good for that. But I work with Isaiah at Riata Agency. It's a pretty small agency. And yeah, I just like that he was on board with what I was asking. Like I didn't really have to explain. He's like, all right, let's just do it. I like doing things crazy. So let's just do something crazy. And yeah, so I was on board for like, let's just break this mold. And I don't want to join a group. I would join a group if something existed for taking trail seriously, but I didn't want to just be like a little road and track jockey that on occasion would like run trails.
Yeah. I had Grayson Murphy on the show a few months ago now, earlier in the year, and she said something that stuck with me that maybe would be interesting to get your perspective on too, and that she found it counterintuitively when you leave a Division I program, her at the University of Utah, like you at the University of Arkansas, that surprisingly you end up in a position where you have a lot less support. In other words, when you go pro, you have less support than you did when you were racing collegiately. Share a little bit about that experience, or do you find that Grayson's characterization overlaps with your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I started seeing the writing on the wall with that as I was about to leave my fifth, because I still had eligibility and I was like, I'm out of here, time to go pro. And then especially with the like introduction of NIL, I was like, wait, I will actually probably be making more in college, if not maybe the same, if you total up all the resources I get plus NIL on top of that to stay for another year, and they still pay for my travel and I get everything done for me. So the 6 year started making a lot more sense.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah, like when you really
I want to go to the University of Arkansas.
Oh, I mean, especially they had just built a new facility. Like we had literally every resource possible. And I'd already established like my community, and not having cross country that year, I could run some trail races like I did worlds in Thailand. And so I could kind of like explore that and then still have an indoor and outdoor season, which I never ended up taking the outdoor season because I got hurt. But I still wouldn't I still do not regret coming back to that. Just with that amount of support at my fingertips, I would not pass that up. And also just having a team. Like that's something that I do miss quite a lot, is having people to run for and like train around and witness working. Like even if they're not in my event group, like the sprinters on our team were just like so inspiring. Like you just have people all working towards a common goal, doing like really amazing things. And that was like, I thought really, really special. It feels a lot more solitary now. Yeah.
It actually reminds me, I wanted to ask you about the trail team. So even if it's not a complete analog to the team that you had at the University of Arkansas, at least it's some supportive structure. And I think people would be really interested to hear specifically how that operation works practically for the athletes. And from your perspective, I think what Andy Wacker and Carly Rempel have done with that is pretty interesting. And certainly they've been ahead of the curve in identifying talent. And I think the results have spoken for themselves more or less. So say a bit about your experience with the trail team and what the secret sauce is there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a job at the University of Arkansas I did not value enough was our director of ops, because that is the part that I don't enjoy about having to be your own director of ops, doing all of the travel, all of the booking of hotels, all the rental cars. Like I would just basically turn my brain up and we'd show off, or turn my brain off and we'd show up at like California and I'd just race and we'd leave. Like I wouldn't have to do anything. We'd get texts of when to show up, what to do. So basically I think that's the gap, a bit of the gap that Andy had seen. Like, oh, there's all these youngsters that just have no freaking clue. And also most of them not the funds to do these high profile races and get this experience. And then the sport's not growing in the US because they can't travel to go race and get visibility. And for me, it's been nice to just even have the option. Like he will just send out an email about booking a hotel, how we're getting transported. It's just like that step that I have not been to Europe very many times. So I don't really know like how we would get from X location in Italy to X location in Switzerland. And Andy's done it, at least has experienced enough to like connect those dots pretty seamlessly. And also, why would you travel alone when you could travel together? And so it does start to feel more like a team and like a bonded group of Americans. So I think what Andy's done logistically to help people is really cool. Also, I want to shout out that the fact that he is doing all of this and still competing at a high level himself. I think that's really, really cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. Shout out Andy Wacker.
Shout out.
So
for sure.
You just referenced this, and yesterday you and I were talking about how I think as you were preparing to go pro, you experienced an injury that I think put you down for about a year. Share a little bit about that experience. What you learned from it?
That injury happened at the indoor national meet where I was runner up in the mile and also runner up in the DMR. And I was like really feeling on a high, as one does. But once again, I think I was like flying a little too close to the sun at that point and hadn't like reverted to old ways 100%, but I was definitely like very one track focused. And was like obviously burning the candle a little bit too bright. So that was a good lesson of like, you're not invincible and you have to still watch out for old patterns that you could fall into, even when you're not inherently like noticing them in the moment. But anyways, so that ended that for the whole career, like whole college career over. And then took a really long time, like about a year to start running and training again. And even after when I could start training for the track season, my foot still was not the same. So it's just been that one I think lingered for longer, but also because I did some pretty good damage to it and needed to get surgery and my tendons were all jacked up. And um, yeah, that was like, okay, this is not to be played with. Like, I can't have another one like that. I just don't want, like, I don't want to go through another navicular surgery or any surgery for running again. And so that helped inform my making a coach decision because I just wanted to make sure I was in an environment where like we're not gonna burn the candle too hot and bright. Like I would just rather be consistent. I would rather be training a little below the level that I like my like line, but actually be able to stack years and years of training than push the line, push the envelope, have amazing stellar performances and then just drop off. Cause that's what it felt like I would do in college. And I'm working with Ben True now, who's, I think, in my opinion, like the epitome of just consistency.
No shit. And Ben True's your coach?
He is, yeah.
Wow.
Crazy, right?
Legend.
Legend indeed. So like,
let's come back and talk about that. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
But basically I'm like, if I can mimic even like something of his career where it was just like, this guy is just always doing it well, doing it right, and doing it consistently. And that's kind of what I wanted to do.
Amazing. All right. Well, let's just stay there. Let's just go there now. But maybe I would be interested to hear about with that injury at that time, if there was anything anxiety inducing about it beyond the fact that you have to get surgery because you're at the threshold between college and going pro. So you can start with that, but I would love to hear more about, the connection with Ben True. What made you want to entrust him with the future of your career, and where we started the conversation of how it sounds like he's fundamentally revolutionized the way you're approaching your training.
Yeah. So on the Ben note, well, on the finishing college note, I think that was a weird high because I knew I was running on a broken navicular, but I had a really, really good meet. So it was like, do we not run her?
It's like when you won a national championship, but then you were hurt. It's like,
and we did win nationals on those points. Like we ended up winning the indoor title with those points. So it's like,
both your national championships came on the back of serious injuries.
Exactly. I hate
highs
that
and lows.
do that to myself. Yeah.
It's the nature of life.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, anyway, so that was a really weird way to end, but because it had gone so well, I did have some options moving forward, which was like, okay, weirdly optimistic in a really rough time. And I don't know if that would have made or break anything. It did break something, but it didn't. Anyways, I do think that helped my odds of getting a better contract. I like to think because then it makes it feel worth it. But so starting working with Ben, like in the midst of an injury, and it was nice to have like guidance every day, which I didn't exactly, like that's not how we did things at Arkansas. So it was just a plan every day I could just follow and trust. And his background is partially cross country skiing because that's what he did in college and like did it professionally for a bit and then switched to running. But his main thing was skiing, which is, I don't think a lot of people know. So he has some of those training principles just like incorporated in how he approaches like endurance training. And so switching from mileage to time, which makes so much more sense to me now.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So now I run off time, which is interesting. And I much prefer it because it just makes sense physiologically. And something I was never able to do due to being inconsistent. And also the NCAA system, I don't think really lends itself to like building an aerobic base. So I didn't actually have a very strong aerobic base out of college. And like, still that's what I'm working on. Like, I think that's my weak point is my aerobic side, which makes me feel optimistic for the future. Cause I'm like, if I could just get a more aerobic, then we can really start jamming. So it's just like slowed a lot of things down. A lot more like volume in terms of just how much I run. For a while, it was a lot of cross-train volume, switching it from a 7-day cycle with an off day to a 10-day cycle and like no real off days, maybe like one scattered here and there. But it's much less intense, I guess, all at once. It's just like 3 days in between workouts and you just have to like keep stacking and keep stacking. It's just a really more or less boring training, but I think it does pay off if you're just super consistent, which it lends itself to being like just one of those slow burners.
I'm so glad we went down this rabbit hole. So for our listeners who are unfamiliar, I think Ben True is one of those unique people in a sport where they're universally admired and respected for their talent and toughness and their originality, I want to say. I recall years ago when Ben True was a professional runner, he was like famous for not being part of one of the post-collegiate professional training groups like the Bowerman Track Club or the Oregon Track Club, for example. And like you said, he was also a fantastic Nordic skier. So I actually talked to David Sinclair about Ben True on the podcast earlier this year too. But kind of an iconoclast in some ways and a native New Englander. So it makes sense that you guys are working together. That's very interesting. I want to look up a little bit more about what he's up to now. But moving along, I want to talk about the moment that you signed with Nike, because this is obviously an important thing and an important milestone in your career. As we've talked about, it seems like professional running has always been on your radar going back to when you were a kid. But tell me about that moment to when the dream finally became a reality, why Nike was the right fit.
Yeah, I mean, I had talked to a lot of the people at Nike when the year before, I mean, just a few of like the sports marketing people, because I was considering joining Bowerman, and that was like almost exactly what I was about to do. So in hindsight, I don't think that would have been the right fit for me in the trail sphere, but they were excited about me as an athlete back then. And so we just kind of like picked up the conversation again. This time, like Lucy, the sports marketing person for trail, was involved. And I was like, oh, sweet. Yeah, this is exactly it. And they were just super responsive. You know, like my agent would, it seemed like things were just moving really, really quickly. So they seemed interested. And I was talking to some other brands, but Nike was just moving forward, like no obstructions, just next step, next step, next step. So we did end up like I ended up signing the contract maybe in April. Yeah, something like that. But I was still hurt. Like at this point, I'm signing the contract and I haven't taken a step because I'm just on crutches. And so it was a little bittersweet because I was like, honestly, I just want to get going with this. And like, I feel like I'm starting my career, but I'm reversing my career. Like I'm not training. I mean, I'm just kind of cross training. Like it didn't feel like I was moving forward. It wasn't that like nice momentum swoop me forward. And I get sent trail shoes. Honestly, I couldn't even try out the trail shoes until the following year. And so it was like, so
like
like
I trust these things work. I'm pretty sure Nike makes shoes that work. Yeah,
exactly. Poor Lucy was like, do you want swimsuits? I'm like, yeah. Send me some swimsuits. But yeah, so it was like not the like glamorous signing, I think, that some people have, or like then they go and have like a breakout race in the uniform. I'm like, I didn't even wear that used uniform. I just skipped a year and started again.
Skipped it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's paying dividends now. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about before we start talking about your season specifically is I'd just love to get your perspective on the emergence of people like you in the sport. Obviously, there's Anna Gibson. Sophia Lockley's kind of an analog, although she comes from the Nordic skiing world. Ali Ostrander, Mika Boudon-Rousseau, Christian Allen, Leah Miro. There's a bunch of these like hybrid track to trail superstars that are coming up right now. You very much being on the leading edge, but as you guys converse with each other, as I'm sure you do, maybe we could be a fly on the wall of some of those conversations. How are people like you and those athletes I just mentioned thinking about trail as a sport and the ability to be kind of a hybrid crossover athlete?
Yeah, I think the emergence of it, because people have been doing it. I mean, Andy ran in college, like Adam Peterman ran in college, Ali Mack ran in college. There's some names that are like, but I don't think the support.
But it's different now.
Yeah,
it's different where people like you and Anna and Mika are like signing contracts where they're incentivized to compete both on the track and on the trail or who are opting to, instead of taking a professional trajectory on the track or road, to choose trail specifically. That's definitely a new phenomenon.
Yeah, I think the freedom that we get is awesome because we get the support to do either, and it's financially stable to just be able to pursue one or both, or whatever combination of the two, three, if you count roads. Like, I think that should be allowed to anyone. And then also that trail is seen as something by a brand that deserves support, and that it's like a valid sport in itself. So the conversation, I mean, to me, it seems like at the point we're at is that it's awesome that, like, you know, Anna, Allie, Grayson, like all of us have, like Christian, Mika, everyone has financial support from their brands. Now it's like, where's the group to me? You know, like, how do we actually combine forces? And talking to people, it seems like, maybe I'm biased because that's kind of like where I'm thinking towards, is like, we're all doing very similar things, just in very different locations. And so it's like, how can we actually come together as like strong American force and maybe make some, and I think Trail Team is trying to do that, but it's hard to get everyone to overlap. But the best part is that we all have the background of a team. So we know the benefits, and like, I don't know, at least I miss that from college a lot. And I think some other people do too. It's like, how can we combine forces and make each other stronger? Yeah.
Yep. I know there's been conversation at the brand level in a couple different places about how you could create the Bowerman Track Club of Trail, the Bowerman Trail Club.
I mean,
so to speak. So I'll send an email to Lucy.
Yeah, let's see what we can get going.
Well, actually, that was another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because inherently when you do co-locate athletes, you know, you're in the same place by definition, right? And I wanted to ask you about where you live, right? And this goes back to what we just mentioned with Ben True, who famously kind of went against the grain, just trained on his own in the woods in New England. But most of the top athletes, and certainly all those names that we just mentioned, live out west. You are based in New England. How do you think about physical location as it relates to setting up your career to give you the best chance at being successful?
Yeah. I mean, this was a big move for me, as I have no ties to the Northeast. Like, it was kind of another big step, which I guess I keep doing for myself. But I don't know. I think for me, it was a lot of coach based. Like, I needed to like be sure I was going to get on a training system that was going to keep me healthy and like keep me consistent. And I knew that I had a ton to learn, and I have learned a ton in the last year from just like observing Ben and just like having him point me in the right direction. Also, I do think the running out here is really, really great. It's just hidden and not at altitude, and maybe the weather sucks part of the year, but I think it gives a certain like dynamic touch to training, because the trails are so technical and also very steep. Like, they don't really do switchbacks. And so it's just like a lot of straight up hill type of running. So I don't know. I think it's got its own flavor out here. I do think that there's benefit in like a training group, maybe somewhere, or a training camp or something in Boulder, or like something like that. Like, let's all come together and train together for a little bit. Because I also think what's cool about trails is that we get the freedom to not have to live in like Flagstaff only. And
Portland. Yeah.
Or Portland. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of people trail minded like that freedom, and like to be dynamic, especially because some people ski in the winter only, and like to craft their seasons kind of differently. And I want to give everybody that freedom, but I think having maybe a training camp or something would be really awesome. Yeah. And I'm kind of the outlier out here, but anyone's welcome.
It is an interesting, thought experiment to think of if the Bowerman Trail Club did exist, right? Like, say, for example, you guys all shared a sponsor and all those names I just mentioned, Anna, Mika, Liam, Christian, etc. We're all training together, just like what level you guys could get to by combining forces, steel sharpens steel, so to speak.
That would be really cool. Maybe in the next few years.
Yeah, maybe. All right. So maybe final question before we get to your season. I wondered if there's anything that was surprising to you about the realities of going pro. I guess we kind of covered this in our discussion about Grayson Murphy's observation, but you being on this professional trajectory for a long time, you probably had a long lead time to consider what life might look like as a professional runner. Is there anything that stands out to you that's different than what you expected?
I don't think I anticipated how alone it would be. And I think that I felt that a lot more in track than I did in trail, because track's just bigger, I guess. And so the meets are just a bunch of random people showing up, running their 5K and leaving. Like there's not much to me, I guess, like camaraderie and stuff. So a lot of those meets felt like lackluster, because I'm like, what the heck am I even doing here? Like I have no real connection. I'm just like warming up alone, running my laps alone, and then leaving. And so I think that burnt me in this spring. And then getting to trail, and like you see the same faces at a lot of these meets, and also Andy providing the support of trail team, and like, oh, we have a ride to this place and this place, and we're all getting dinner at this place. Like I think that helped a lot, just to me, because I'm like fairly social and like to not just be like, I'm here to race only to race. Like I like to enjoy the place and the people. So I think trail to me has worked out as like a good in between of like both being in an individual sport out for myself, but then also having friends and what feels like teammates that are all out here to do the same thing. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. So let's talk about your season, and maybe in the interest of time, we'll just kind of fast forward to the Golden Trail stuff. Obviously you raced domestically, before you got to these international level events with Golden Trail, where you had a ton of success here in the last quarter of the year. Maybe starting with Headlands, you were third place there, massive results in what I believe was your first ever Golden Trail World Series event. So maybe just tell me about that race and how it impacted your view of what you could achieve in the sport.
Yeah, I guess I didn't know what to expect there. I had come off of being sick, like at the end of my first little Europe trip out to race. And so all those races were just like, like Poland didn't happen. And I showed up there to do that. And like, I don't know, it just felt like things were things weren't swinging in my direction. But yeah, Headlands, I think that course just played to my favor, and I didn't quite know what to expect. Like I had studied the course, but you never know how, like still 2 to 2.5 hours is like, for where I'm at training wise in my like personal development, is still long for me, which is why I didn't do Sears at all. Cause that felt like a massive swing. And if I'm going to show up, I want to actually be prepared and like confident. And I was not ready for 3 to 4 hour racing. So 2 hours felt like still a big jump, but I think I could have, like, I felt confident in handling that. But yeah, it being a pretty fast course, and I like really enjoy steep descent. So like that middle descent into Stinson Beach was really like good for me, I think. And the trails were quick too. It wasn't like slow running. So I could just kind of use some of my like turnover and speed, I think, in those moments. But yeah, Headlands did go pretty well.
Did you surprise yourself being that it was your first Golden Trail race?
Yeah,
with Poland being canceled?
I think I like just wanted to run within my ability the whole time. And I was surprised that running within my ability was racing for third, like it was just like, oh, okay, this is, I'd come off of like feeling pretty unconfident and unfit. And I was like, okay, all that training was for nothing. Like I am pretty fit. It's just maybe some of those didn't come together for other reasons.
Yeah. So the following weekend was Mammoth Trail Fest. You were sixth. And as I recall, I saw you finish there. And I think you had bloody knees from memory. So before we get to the world final, which was obviously a huge exclamation point, anything you want to share from Mammoth?
Oh, I think I more battled the place more than the actual race. I don't know. I just wanted to like go out hot. And of course, altitude bit me in the butt because I live in the East Coast. And like, that was just not easy. I think the place more took me down than the actual race itself.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, sixth place in that field is certainly nothing to be ashamed of. But yeah, kind of probably, I'm sure, what you consider the major highlight of your season was the Golden Trail World Final in Switzerland, which was, I think, at the end of October. You finished second in that race behind Joylene Chippingino and in front of Joyce and Jeru, which was a massive result given Joyce won the whole Golden Trail World Series. I'd love to, if you don't mind, just give you a couple minutes to just give us the condensed version of that race report, because, you know, for me, Golden Trail World Series racing and the Golden Trail World Final is kind of the pinnacle of the competitive end of the sport right now. You can make an argument for UTMB and Western States too, but the density and the caliber of athlete in that event was incredible. Mm-hmm. And so your second place finish was a massive standout performance. So give us the 2-minute version of the race report there. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I guess I showed up in the best position if you like really think about it, because I was ranked like 24th or something because I'd only done those 2 races. So like when I got there, I'm not even sure I had a plan. I mean, I had a race plan, but like I'm not sure I even knew what I was there for. Like I was talking to people and I'm like, what am I going for? Because I felt out of the running for money, you know, like, oh, maybe I could make a little money because prize money went to top 20. And so I was like, okay, whatever, like no expectation at all, just because I hadn't played the game. And so the prologue went off and 30-minute race was like perfect for me. Like, here we go. Like finally a short trail race. And yeah, it was fun to just like go out and race hard with no expectations. And the final, like, I think things just kept happening in my favor that I wasn't even asking for. Like, I'm just going to run within my ability. Like, I had broken down the course, knew how I wanted to run it, like, kind of had a good idea of how I wanted to feel, like, and things just kept happening. Like, I was fully content with third, and I hadn't even seen Joyce the whole race. And I was like, okay, yeah, third's in the bag, possibly. Like, I could actually pull this off. And then I saw her on the last steep climb and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even like consider second as an option. And so coming down the steep descent, and like, I think that course played to me as well with being pretty short climbs and then long descents, short climb, I mean, 1,200 to 1,500 foot climbs. And then a good sized technical descent, like on the backside of the climb. So I could just kind of like, I feel like that's part of my strength as well, is being able to run like technical pretty efficiently. Yeah. And then I caught her at the bottom of the last descent and was like, oh, well, she'll probably have a response. And I was like ready to actually have to like sprint the last K or so, and like actually come down to a sprint finish. But she had cooked herself, I think, trying to go out that hot. But yeah, so second ended up happening, and Madalena didn't have like a race that I know she's capable of. So I think just things were playing into my favor. And also I wasn't really tired. Like I felt incredible in both of those races. And maybe that was because I played the season conservatively, but yeah, I felt really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did it feel like a massive moment for you? Because I mean, for those of us who are fans of American athletes and observers of the Golden Trail World Series, it was awesome to see you land on a podium at the World Final. And especially with the highs and lows that you've experienced throughout your running career, but especially in the moment when you were turning pro, it probably validated that, going back to watching Killian videos in high school, that you were on the right path.
Oh, definitely. And I felt like I was capable of being up there. I just had never proven it to myself. And so that was cool to be like, wow, I can actually run with these women that I was like more or less intimidated by, just because they have like, I mean, all like Judith has such a big resume, like Sarah Alonso has a great resume, like everyone has a huge trail resume, and I don't have much under my belt yet, but it was cool to just see where I stacked up. And that was kind of the point of this year, is like, just see where you stack up and we can move from there. Yeah.
All right. Well, it begs the question of what's the point of next year, but I want to ask you one more question before we get there and start winding down. Obviously, we can't forget that you finished your season, was it last weekend, 2 weekends ago, with your homecoming. LGZ returns to Arkansas. You went to Bentonville for the Dirt Circus 10K, where you won, closing out an incredibly strong season. Yeah, so before we start looking ahead, if there's anything you want to share about the Dirt Circus, I'm sure the audience would love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I had come off of the Golden Trail race pretty stoked and also not burnt out, which I attribute to Ben's training as well. Like I've never been at the end of a season and still felt pretty good. So I think that that's a good sign. And I just felt like I couldn't pass up on that race. And I was there the year previously just watching, and I saw how much support that the race director gave to athletes. And he was so stoked on like elite athletes at his event. And so I'm like, I got to come back and do this. Like, this just has to be on my schedule. So it was a little random to come from like Golden Trail 2 hour races to like a speedy 40-minute race in Arkansas. But I felt like I couldn't pass that up. And it was also a fantastic event. So
yeah, you got used to running in circles around an oval and cross country courses probably. And here you are making your trail debut in the great state of Arkansas. I'm sure they're glad to have you. Okay, so now transitioning to looking ahead now. You have some optionality. I'm sure you're probably ending the season feeling confident and excited about the future. Anything you want to share about your goals for 25?
Yeah, I think a big one I want to focus for 2025 is Sears and All. I got to watch last year and it's just super inspiring. And I feel like it intimidated me last year, but I have a little bit more fitness and like an actual plan for how to conquer it maybe next year. We'll see. It still scares me a lot, but that's when I'm excited to swing at. So hopefully a good finish there. And I definitely want to try to make the world's team in September. For the classic distance, preferably. So those two are probably like the 2 A goals for the year. And then I don't know, I want to definitely race more Golden Trail and like dabble in some other like maybe World Cup races. But the 2 big are Sears and All in Worlds, hopefully.
Holy smokes. Popcorn emoji. So that means Broken Arrow to qualify for Worlds, plus Sears and All, and likely a couple other Golden Trail races in 2025 for LGZ.
Yeah, we'll see about that. Yeah, and we also are hosting at Sunapee, I think, the Classic too. So it'll be at least like close to home here.
Oh, so the Classic. Okay, right. So the Classic is at Sunapee, not at Broken Arrow.
We'll see if I make it out to Broken Arrow. I think I would need an altitude camp beforehand. Yeah. So if I can time that out, then I'll do that. But we'll see.
My mistake.
We'll see about that.
So
no, all good.
Home field advantage there at Sunapee, and then hopefully qualify for Team USA.
Yeah.
Not as a junior this time, as a senior, so to speak.
More legit.
Cool. Well, Lauren, it's been so fun to chat with you here on the podcast. I end all these shows with the same closing question for everybody. That closing question is just, who is one person that you admire, inside or outside of sport, living or dead? Why do you admire that person?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I thought about this question a lot, and I feel like on any given day I could have a different answer, but probably more of just like who I've been kind of trying to mimic right now, or who I really look up to right now, is like actually Ben and Sarah True. So that's been nice to like see them up close and personal. Because if people don't know, Sarah's also an incredible athlete.
Olympian.
An Olympic triathlete and Ironman triathlete. And, they have a kid, and they just balance like just being humans and also being insane athletes, like really humbly and really impressively. So yeah, I don't know. Them right now is, and they're just, I don't know, so silently get work done and show up, get the job done, come home, like live a very clean and quiet life. And I don't know, it is just really admirable to see that up close. So probably the Trues in my backyard.
So fun. I'm so glad we stumbled upon the Trues as part of our podcast conversation here today.
Yeah.
I followed Sarah True's career quite closely when she was competing for Olympic medals, sort of with and alongside Gwen Jorgensen for Team USA. And as we just have spoken about, Ben True, a very interesting character in the history of American running and cross-country skiing, for that matter. And it's really interesting to hear that you're coached by him. Well, Lauren, congratulations on an amazing 2024 season. I'm now a huge fan of yours. Can't wait to see you compete in 2025. And I hope you enjoy the holiday season.
You as well. Thanks for the chat. Really enjoyed being on.